to the Momnificent Podcast. This is the place where we help parents live a happy, healthy life with their kids. We're going to show you how to connect with your child and help them even in their most difficult moments as we hear from experts in the field. I'm your host, Dr. Karin Jakubowski, an international speaker, public school principal, and former struggling student. The Momnificent Podcast equips parents with science-based strategies to help you live a happy, healthy life with your kids. Welcome.
Gina Wilson is a holistic executive coach, author, and coach to adults, college students, and families with ADD. I am so excited to have her back on our podcast because she conducts also ADD education and advocacy programs at colleges and universities, high schools, and in the community, and has trained educators and youth program administrators on supporting children with ADHD. She has written about ADD in Coaching Perspectives 3 and about developing soft skills in her latest book that we talked about on our recent episode, Skills That Build. And if you didn't have a chance to check that one out, I highly recommend it. Not only as a parent and educator, any person can learn something from that interview. And that was so awesome. Thank you, Gina. And welcome back to Momnificent.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back. I'm delighted to be here.
So Gina, didn't you say one of your kids struggled with ADD, and how did you know they had ADD, or what age were they? And can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yes, I had two children with ADD. They're grown adults now. One was diagnosed at age 7 and another at age 11. The one had really exhibited hyperactivity to the point where the impulsivity became a safety issue. He was becoming accident prone, having a lot of things like falling off his bike, impulsive speed, with the bike, and just, normal rough and tumble play that, became an issue. I remember spending like 4 Aprils in the emergency room, with stitches here and a cut here and a puncture wound. He stepped on something. I mean, the things like that just kept getting more and more difficult to manage. And I was concerned for his safety. So for that child, the hyperactivity component was a red flag for me. The impulsivity, did not really see other issues at school or socially, but that was definitely a safety concern for me to start asking questions. With the other child, there was no real exhibited hyperactivity. There was not even any noticeable inattentiveness. But with her, it was more, she would articulate as she got older, and she was the one who diagnosed at 11. She was able to articulate to me that there was a lot of thoughts going on in her head at the same time, and almost to the point of being overwhelmed by, all of this content going through her head. And there was also some physical signs of stress, stomach aches and things like that. So started asking questions, related to those, and got a full medical evaluation and so forth. And so for both children, we brought them to a pediatrician, started there, and brought in specialists as we needed to. And ultimately, they were both diagnosed, and one with ADHD, one with ADD at the time. My children are older now, so it was before some of the terminology had changed. But that's how it was for us.
So did you notice it, or did the teachers notice it and share it with you, or was it different for each child?
It was definitely something I noticed, and from an early age, honestly, for the younger one, it was really evident that he had hyperactivity. However, it wasn't interfering. And of course, as we'll probably talk about later in the podcast, if it's starting to interfere with, a function in their lives, then of course that becomes problematic. So I didn't notice any interfering. So I thought, well, this is something we can work with, and we can get through this through, behavioral methods, and just educating ourselves and our child really about what was going on. But when the safety issue became a regular occurrence, then we felt that, we needed to do something. And also for the other child, she was exhibiting stress symptoms, and I think from trying to manage the ADD internally. So I didn't want her to have to experience that if there was something we could do to support her.
Mm. And so you also help coach kids or maybe adults who have ADD, but did you have someone like that for your kids? Is that how you got into that? Or how did you see this need for coaching kids or kids?
I didn't have a coach, and I would have liked to have had a coach at the time. I did educate myself, and I taught psychology. I studied experimental cognitive psychology, so I know a little bit about how the brain works and how learning occurs, and child development to a degree. So I knew to ask the questions. But when I started coaching, and this was about 9 years ago, I felt that I was seeing in some of my adult clients in the workplace symptoms of ADHD, and they were coming to me with some of the same sort of executive function challenges, organizational skills, planning, time management, things like that, that are common challenges for those with ADHD. So I felt, this is something I can bring into my coaching practice. So I started working with my adult clients on ADHD. Many of them actually came to me and said, can you work with my college age children who are having some of these same issues? So I started coaching college students. And then I decided to develop a program around that for college students, for ADHD in the workplace, and also for educators and people who work with children who needed a better understanding of ADHD.
Well, I am so excited, actually, personally, that you're sharing this, because I'm not kidding you. Just this last week, I was talking to someone that I met, and their child struggled with ADHD all growing up, and they read every book there was out there, and they really struggled in school, like were misunderstood, and then, looked like they were the bad kid and got in trouble. And she got calls from school like so many times. And now he's an adult, he's in his early 20s. And she literally was, you're not going to believe I'm saying this. She literally was like, they should have coaches for adults like they do for what you do when you have the kids having the issues. Okay. So and it's funny because I just got her hooked on listening to my podcast.
Great.
And I can't wait. I'm going to text her after this call and be like, oh my gosh, I found someone for your son. I mean, it's probably a whole other hurdle to get the son to actually like want it, right? Because it's one thing that I want this for my 20-some-year-old, but how do I make it appealing?
You'd be surprised. A lot of people recognize it, say, I could really use this kind of support.
This is so exciting. I'm so excited we're on this call together. Okay, so back to one of my other questions. What's a common indicator or a look for when it comes to a kid struggling with ADD? Because I feel like that's the one that's kind of missed more often, right? Or help us with that.
So you're referring to the inattentive ADHD, inattentive, formerly known as ADD, right? So the terminology has changed. Since my children were originally diagnosed many years ago, we use the term ADD for the inattentive type. Now there's subtypes, which we can get into, but the inattentive type is kind of a sleeper, right? So we don't always catch that. The hyperactivity is much more easily noticed. And I feel that, we can dismiss it maybe in terms of someone's really they're just not interested, or they're not really, they don't have a high energy level. And there's a lot of ways we can kind of minimize what might be going on when we see someone being inattentive. So that one, unfortunately, does get less frequently diagnosed. And unfortunately, it happens, more girls are characterized with ADD, inattentive ADHD.
I was going to ask you that. Yes, I feel like I hear of that more often.
Mm-hmm. And so it does, and in our case, it was as the child got older, that's when it became more evident. As a younger child, it really wasn't noticeable in any way. And so I think I'm glad you brought that up, because there's no one indicator, right? So if everyone had the hyperactivity component, that would be an easier thing, right? But not everyone is. In fact, and I've learned, through my research and talking with other parents and clients, there are so many ways that ADHD manifests itself from person to person. Even within families, there could be, individual differences. So there is no one comment. I wish there was. I wish there was a lab test. I mean, we can measure a blood level or something. That we're not there yet. We don't know enough about it, frankly. So there's no one red flag. But I would caution parents, if there's anything that seems to be causing difficulty for your child, start asking the questions, start making observations, start involving others to get some feedback. And, whether it's ADHD or anything else, if you see your child struggling, get the resources that you need. And, and if that means educating yourself, that means asking the, teachers at school, other people who maybe a babysitter or grandparents, extended family, people who interact with your child on a regular basis can give you feedback. And then you can start developing questions and a set of experts to refer to. And I would take advantage of those resources.
So when you say ask the right questions, what kind of questions do you mean?
Well, so there are questions like medical questions, right? So you would want to make sure that you've had a full medical evaluation of your child, because there's a lot of lookalikes for ADHD symptoms. A child could be just deprived of sleep. They're not getting good quality sleep. They're not getting enough sleep. They're not, they're not turning off screen early enough so that their brain can actually calm down and actually get good quality sleep. So that might mimic an ADHD symptom of inattentiveness, because you're simply, not able to process and attend like you might if you had a full night's sleep, if you had regular, consistent sleep. So you really need to tease out other things that are going on. So start with your pediatrician and find out, are there medical conditions going on here, or is there something else that I need to be concerned of? So start asking those kinds of questions. Also, ask your child. Your child can articulate some things, particularly older children, school-age children can tell you if they're not feeling right. They may not be able to articulate exactly what, but if something is different, they can sort of begin to tell you. And I would say listen to your child, and also listen to yourself as a parent. As a teacher, this child, and if you spot something that seems just not out of sorts, you really need to bring that to the attention of people who can help. So if you're the teacher, you may want to mention it to the parents. If you're a parent, you may want to ask the teacher, have you noticed such and such? And so involve the community of support that you have available to you, and ask questions, start asking questions, start learning about the various conditions, and come armed to an appointment. Let's say you're seeing the pediatrician, come armed with information so that you can ask, does this apply to my child? Is this something that I need to be concerned about?
And when you work and coach a child or an adult or a young adult, what kinds of things, can you give us a glimpse of what someone might expect if they were curious, like, well, what does that really look like?
Sure. So a lot of it starts with, all coaching is that, in fact, starts with self-awareness. So we start with, how much do you know about your condition? And surprisingly, a lot of people don't know enough about their condition. So we start with that and develop that sense of, where they're struggling, where their strengths are, because we very much leverage strengths to manage conditions like ADHD. And so we use those strengths to help develop coping mechanisms, develop workarounds, another way of doing something that might be challenging. If we do it in one way, we might try it in another with another approach. So self-awareness is the first thing. Education is the second, knowing the condition, knowing how it manifests itself in you. And then figuring out how you work best. And that works for teens. It works really well for adults. But when we start to align our practice, our daily life with our strengths and our methods, our approach to solving problems, to doing work, to interacting with others, when we start putting all those things together in a way where we can really thrive and work towards our potential, we're not fighting upstream. We're not swimming upstream. We're not fighting the ADD symptoms. And that's why with adults, a lot of times people think that you outgrow ADHD. You really don't outgrow it. It is it's a brain-based condition that typically we just develop ways of working with it. And we can choose habits and lifestyles as adults that align with our strengths and our abilities. Whereas with children, we're in somewhat artificial settings, right? We're in a classroom, we're in, in social situations that are more contrived, and the child has less control over that. But as an adult, we have a lot more choice and autonomy in how we work and what kind of work we go into. There's certain fields that lend themselves. There's a lot of great entrepreneurs who have ADHD. Why? Because they're able to focus on what they really like to do, and they're able to bring that energy to a line of work, right? So unfortunately with children, they don't yet have that autonomy, so they can't necessarily exercise some of those same approaches, but that's what we look for in coaching. So we look at the whole person, we look at the work, we look at the family, we look at social relationships, we look at everything that gives us a full holistic view of that individual, whether it's an adult or a teenager. We start working through, how can you leverage your strengths? What kind of situation works best for you? How do you learn best? Are you a person who hears, you like books on tape and that kind of thing, or you like to read? Are you a person who's very visual? Are you a person who, maybe you can take notes in meetings? I have this a lot of times with my adult clients who are typically hyperactive, and they complain they can't sit through an all-day meeting and at work. Well, how about you take notes? And that works two ways. First of all, you're retaining the information more because you're physically writing it down or you're typing it in a computer. But also, it brings an interest. So the speaker, let's say, feels that, oh, this person's really attending to what I'm saying. So, I mean, it works two ways. It's good for you. It's good for the other people in the meeting. And it is a way for you to manifest the ADHD in a very positive, constructive way. So you're not drumming your hands on the table. You're not shaking your leg. You're not getting up and down from your chair. But so these are accommodations that we make for ourselves as adults. We can make some of these choices. For children, they might have a little less flexibility in the classroom setting, but as adults, we learn, what works, what doesn't work. Pretty sure I have ADD and never was diagnosed. Of course, as adults, we were too young before a lot of the research was done. And unfortunately, I think some behaviors are written off as, just a behavioral issue and not really realizing it's a brain-based condition. I feel that, the advances in technology and the research have really helped people become much more aware of ADHD as a condition. But, having two children with ADHD, pretty good chance that me and probably my husband as well are ADHD people. But for me, I have my own business. I have my own practice. I'm a pretty high energy person. I wrote a book. I channel my energy in ways, that in things that I'm interested in. So it's worked out for me. It's worked out for my family. And I like to leave that thought with my clients is that once you align with your strengths and what you're capable of doing, and you can focus that energy that way, your ADHD will really work for you, and it'll be a blessing. It'll be a benefit. And I want people to see it that way because it truly can be.
And sometimes it kind of feels quite the opposite.
Yes, it can. Yes.
It's a burden and oh no, oh my, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help. And when you see your kids struggling, like that's so hard, right? As a mom and a parent, it's like, can I struggle? Like, I don't want to see my kids struggle. And then parents are at a loss of, what to do or what steps to take or how to help them. And I love how you brought up just like almost like the skill building and the recognizing those different strategies that I think kids and adults have to learn. Did you figure that out and help your kids with that? Or how did you know, like, did you put your kids on meds? How did you make a decision to do that or not? Like, then there's the whole, question about meds.
Yeah, so with our family, we were very cognizant of the fact that time management, organization skills would help, whether someone has ADHD or not. we can all use it. These are not innate abilities. We're not born knowing how to, step through a 6-week long project, or you do a research paper or anything like that. We spend a lot of time, my husband and I, teaching our kids some of the strategies that we use as adults. We're both business owners. We both are probably what somebody would call high energy individuals. And so we did this. We didn't have coaches available to us at the time. So we taught them what we knew, what worked for us, what didn't work for us. We also took advantage at school. There was a lot of support at school. The counselors at school were very helpful. So we, relied on their expertise, and they helped guide our children as well. We had some fantastic educators along the way who I would really be remiss if I didn't recognize their contribution to helping our kids. Some of them really embraced our children and enabled them to really thrive in their academic career. But we've tried medication. For the younger one, who was diagnosed at an early age, we went through the medication regimen. The older one was on a different set of meds. We tried those. There were times when we changed the medication. There were times when we went off the medication. As the kids got older, a lot of changes had to be made. And they elected to make some of the changes for themselves. As they became teenagers, they became much more self-aware, and so we worked through that. And I have clients who don't take medication, who are against medication, or who, for whatever reason, their child can't take medication. That's fine. But I would caution, even if you aren't taking medication, you still need to address some of those behavioral components, right? So learning these techniques for self-awareness, the techniques for time management, the techniques for breaking down a huge project into smaller bits, all of that can be taught and learned and actually work together for a multifaceted approach. And I believe that works best. There's those who, for whatever reason, can't take medications. There's side effects. You have to work through all of that. The regimen of a medication for these meds is particularly complex. In other words, we have neurotransmitters that are affected by the types of medication that are given for ADHD. If we are messing with our schedule, we mess with what's going on in those the neurotransmitters in our brain. So we're not only affecting ADHD behavior, but we're also affecting other brain functions. So it's really important to stick to the regimen, administer the medications on a regular basis at the same times, as directed by your physician. It's really important. And if you need to make a change, work with that physician to make those adjustments. It might be the time of day that you're taking it. If you take it too late in the day, it may keep the child up at night. We work through a lot of those challenges, but ultimately you find what works best for you. And we found that the multifaceted approach worked really well. A lot of my clients, adult clients, they don't take the medications, but they have learned some of these skills, where they're developing some of these skills to help them with the executive functions. So I think, it's not a one size fits all solution. And so when we recognize the individual, then we work for, the best approach that works for them.
And I just want to back up for just a second to one of the other questions we were talking about. Even though there's a variety of examples of what ADD could look like for a person or what they exemplify, what are the ones that you've seen? Maybe someone's listening and they aren't familiar with any signs of ADD. What are just a few that you have seen, even though we know everyone's going to be kind of individual?
Sure. So a lot of times, let's take the hyperactivity component. Obviously, that could be a very physical thing, right? Where a person is kind of just really expending energy, like as if they're driven by a motor. We see this with young children a lot, that they simply can't sit still. They fall off the chair at dinner time. They just are fidgeting all the time. They simply just seem to have a lot of energy to expel. That's pretty visible, right, that we can see, and sometimes it's truly differentiating one child from another in terms of the level and the intensity of the activity. But it could also be someone who's very, very chatty, right? So it may not be physical hyperactivity. It might be someone who just talks incessantly, or who talks so fast you can't even really pick up but every other word. Okay, so this may be another manifestation of hyperactivity. It might be someone whose brain is running through hundreds and hundreds of thoughts. Okay, so it manifests itself differently from individual to individual. We also might see someone who's got challenges with impulse control. So it might be someone interrupting conversations. I see this in adults all the time in meetings. You know, you could be sitting at work and the same individuals are constantly interrupting the speaker or, you know, the team. So, you know, it could be interruption. That is a point of impulsivity, right? So we have to train ourselves to wait until someone's finished speaking, and
It's so hard.
it is hard. It
So
is hard.
I deal with it myself. I'm diagnosed, sitting over here listening.
Well, so
Sorry,
you're
keep going.
but you know, general inattentiveness, we might see someone some people may be described as having zoned out, right? Or this person is really chill. Well, it could be that they have the inattentive component of ADHD. So it's interesting to see how it's described and how it changes from children to adults. So, you know, children grow out of that hyperactivity, that physical hyperactivity a lot, but they learn to channel that energy elsewhere. And that becomes more evident as they start to play sports, or they, you know, they take up running, or, you know, they might do something that channels that energy physically in another way, or they're a fitness fanatic. And these can be very adaptive behaviors, right? And a good way to channel this extra energy. But also things that we don't see all the time, where someone who is struggling, particularly in school, they have trouble with getting the right things in the backpack. They might leave books in the locker, or they might leave something on the bus, or they left their violin at home on the day they have band. You know, things like these kinds of, you would almost say, you know, kind of just disorganized behaviors could be a sign of ADHD. So I would look for things like that. And as adults too, you know, we're packing for a trip, we forget the suitcase or something like that. It happens, and it is much more common than you think. In fact, the statistics are showing maybe 25 to 30% of families, if there's one child diagnosed with ADHD, is 25 to 30% chance that someone else in the family is diagnosed as well.
Oh, really?
So it's a real, you know, it's showing the genetic component. There is some biological basis. It can be absolutely. It can be manifest itself differently among those children or within the family, but chances are there's someone else in the family. And adults, we're seeing, you know, 3-4% of adults now being diagnosed with ADHD, much less so than children, partially because they've already developed mechanisms and coping strategies that they can manage the ADD, and it's not interfering. So that's when we really need to start paying attention. When we see something interfering with our child's ability to realize their full potential, or if it's interfering with their social relationships, if it's interfering with their academics, you know, that's when we really start to question. But maybe as adults, they've already adapted, so they're less likely to go and be diagnosed. But some adults, I've had some clients who, you know, later in life decide that something is going on, and they decide to get tested, and they discover for themselves, maybe they are diagnosed at that point with ADHD.
So if a sibling has it, you could kind of be aware that it might show up in another of your children, or if you as the parent or the grandparent had it, it might be something that you might kind of look for or be on the lookout for in your own children.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a question that I had for you. And then, so what are some successful strategies? Like maybe a parent has a child with ADHD or ADD, and let's take homework. Like that's a really big struggle at home when they come home. are there any strategies that you can share with us that maybe have helped you that someone listening could implement? Even though I know sometimes when you go to the doctor, they give you all these strategies, but maybe someone listening recognizes these kind of symptoms in their child, and maybe there's some things they could take some steps to help their child with today.
Yes, I think one of the often overlooked strategies is a regular schedule. Okay, having consistency and structure around when we do our work, when we do our homework, when we have free time, when we have screen time. Sticking to a structure is really helpful for someone with ADHD, so they can start to wrap their mind around, okay, now after school I have half hour of free play, and then I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do a half hour of homework, or whatever age appropriate lengths of time. But the point is to establish a regular schedule and a pattern so that it's introduces a level of predictability, and it sort of minimizes the chaos. Because when you think about an ADHD brain, there's a lot of chaos going on, right? So whatever we can do to minimize and create regularity and routine helps with our productivity and with our ability to manage multiple demands. And as we get older, of course, that becomes even more of a concern. We need to manage multiple demands, but it doesn't mean multitasking. So I would caution parents that, if your child has ADHD, you probably don't want them doing a few things at one time, right? So maybe you itemize, okay, tonight we're working on, the math homework, Spanish, English paper, and so you try to just manage how much time you're going to devote to each of those areas. You try not to introduce a lot going on at once. So maybe your child doesn't do well if he hears background noise, or maybe there are some people who work better with low music or white noise machines. And so when you find those strategies that work for your child, kind of set the stage, right? Create that work area. They have a desk in a certain place that's quiet where they can work without interruption, without distraction. We need to do all these things to position our children to be successful. And we also do this for adults at work, right? So in coaching, a lot of my adult clients will say, I can't work in this open office environment. We have one long table with a bunch of workstations, and this one's on the phone, this one's in a meeting, these two are talking, and I just can't attend to what's going on. It's because they know what works for them, and this is not the type of environment where they work best. So we make accommodations. We ask if the boss can, reallocate them to an office with a closed door or a quiet area of the room, or maybe 2 days a week they work from home. Before the pandemic, we were doing that a lot, like asking for a time to work at home so that dedicated time could be allocated to a project. So similarly with children, we need to use these same sort of structured techniques to have the child in an environment where they can work best. And that means educating other people in the family. You don't just go in and knock on their door, when we have this 20 minutes of math time, so respecting boundaries is really important. So I would say introducing structure, knowing what's best, set up a work environment for homework. When is it going to happen? Where is it going to happen? And get all those positions in place so that you don't have to recreate it each night as the child, is starting to do their homework for the evening.
Such valuable tips. Thank you so much for that. So what's one last thing you would like to leave our listeners with in the area of being an advocate for your child with ADHD? What's one of the biggest lessons you learned, or a biggest takeaway that you want to just leave our listeners with today?
Well, two things come to mind. One is I feel that ADHD is not something to be terribly concerned about. As I said, people grow and manage the challenges that come with ADHD, and they can then, as adults, become really great contributors to society. And so I feel like, I want to offer that hope, because I think some parents of young children particularly, get overwhelmed with, oh my gosh, what does this mean? And how's this child going to do later in life? So I want to offer that hope that it's absolutely manageable, and it's something that we can help our children with by supporting them with their strengths, recognizing their strengths, have them learn to recognize their strengths. We can also help them with stress management so that as things get overwhelming or difficult, they learn for themselves how to take care of themselves. I think it's just really important. And I feel like that's probably the biggest thing we can do as parents is help our children get through challenges. And so if we can work with them and they work through these issues as children, they can then do it even better as adults, as teenagers and adults. And particularly as they get on to college, you're not going to be there to help them and day to day, deal with classes and all the demands in college. But if you set that stage early on, then they can be successful in their college days as well. So support them, advocate for them, teach them to advocate for themselves. Role play, if that means, you pretend you're the teacher and the child talks to you as they're going to go in and talk to their teacher tomorrow and ask, well, what about this item you marked wrong on my test? I don't think it's wrong. And here's why. You need to be able to have a child feel comfortable doing that. And in order to do so, maybe that means the parent takes on the other role and role plays some of those situations so that the child develops the confidence to speak for themselves, to advocate for themselves, to educate others on how they work best. Because as an educator, you want the child to succeed. In the workplace, employers want employees to succeed. They want them to do well. So everyone will benefit if we know how someone works best. And the accountability has to start with that individual, though, and asking for what they need, because not everyone will know, what an individual needs. So we need to be able to advocate for ourselves and ask and educate others as appropriate.
And advocating for yourself is a skill they're going to need for the rest of their life.
Absolutely.
And if we can practice that with them now, I love that role playing idea, and being in the other person's shoes. Like, I'll be the teacher, you be the kid. Now let's switch. And sometimes I hear parents saying like, well, my kid is too young that they won't say that to the teacher. And well, yeah, actually you can kind of teach them to say that. I mean, if you say it in a very respectful way, most teachers will listen and be like, oh, hey, well, let's talk about that, or let's work through this together. That's a really awesome point that you bring out. So Gina, where can someone go to find and follow you?
Well, my website is GinaWilson.com. You can connect with me there on LinkedIn, on Instagram and Twitter. Please email me. If you have any questions, I'm happy to entertain questions through the website. There's a contact form. But absolutely, take advantage of resources that are out there. If I can be a resource, I'd love to do so. So that would be great.
Well, this is awesome. And I know already one person right after this call that I'm going to info with that I just was talking to last week. I love how that happens. Gina, thank you so much again for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you, Karin.
Well, that's all we've got for this episode of the Momnificent Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I would be honored if you would subscribe and rate if you really liked it. I know wherever you're listening right now, it might not be the best time to leave a comment, but feel free to leave a question, a review, or a comment at any time. And until next time, remember, don't worry, be happy.